Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing very well. A really cool interview that we've got booked for today. One of the most cool, for lack of a better word, planes out there that everyone who's watching this interview probably agrees with is the AC-130 Gunship. It's a Herc, which is a cool plane anyway, but not particularly exciting, made super sexy by filling it with guns. I mean, that's the kind of thing I would do. Who would have thought that someone would actually make this? I've got an operator here that used to operate in one of these. Say hello, John.
Hello, Cap. How are you today, sir?
Yeah, I'm beautiful, thank you. Bit of a sore throat, but we're gonna push through. We're gonna do our best. So, how did we meet? Let me think. You must have sent me a message. It was about leather crafting.
Correct.
And you offered, I think, to make some leather crafting for me. Nice people being nice, which is great. And then you just dropped into conversation. This happens a lot. Another guy's just done it. I've been talking to him for ages, and he suddenly said, "Oh, by the way, I used to be a Hornet pilot. Is that any?" Like, yeah, awesome. So you said you used to work aboard the AC-130A. And I said, okay, I've got to interview that. The chance of me ever finding an operator aboard this is so minimal that that's great. So we've got to go and do it. So first of all, we need to learn a little bit about this aircraft, because I know literally it's a Hercules with guns, and that's it. There was on the bit of toing and froing I did with you, there was some several versions. There was an A and some other versions. Can you roughly explain the differences between them? And one was called Spectra, one was called Gunship, or
we can hit in this, but I'll start it. Started out with the AC-47, which is the old C-47, where it started out just as a concept with some guys trying some stuff out in Vietnam with a 30 millimeter or 20 millimeter cannon out the left side of the aircraft, flying a pylon turn, which morphed into the AC-119 with better optics and a better gun sight. And then that morphed into the AC-130, which originally A models, which is what they were flying at the time, A models with only a 20 mil, a 7.62, and then it morphed into two 20 mils, two 7.62s, and two 40 millimeter cannons.
Roger.
And by that time, they had incorporated a low light level television, a IR sensor, which by today's standards was almost like watching bad black and white television, but at the time it was some of the best things going. And they also had various and sundry sensors to detect, and I'm not making this up, the spark made by the coils on the trucks on the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
Wowza.
And other electronic warfare capabilities like that, because that is in Vietnam is where the two missions were truck busting on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and then troops in contact. Most of the time, those were at Special Forces A-Team detachments that were trying to be able.
Timeline-wise, is this all around early Vietnam?
Early Vietnam.
Right.
They started in '65. With the original experimentation of the AC-47, and that morphed along 2 years. A lot of testing done at Eglin Air Force Base. And '67 was the first concept, with the C-130, and I believe the first gunships, AC-130 gunships, they were based out of Udon, Thailand. They got there in '68.
Wowza. I mean, this is already like the most sexy interview we've ever done. I'm looking at a C-119 with two heffing great Vulcan cannons just pointing out of windows, essentially.
Yes.
It's like, I don't know, it's kind of the thing of dreams. It's kind of the thing I dream about, if I could have nice dreams. Okay, so we've got a bit of background there about how we went 47, 119, 130. Any idea why they ended on the 130? Did it just simply prove the best gun platform in testing, do you think?
It did, but for many reasons. The endurance, the 119 was plagued, even though they had the right 4350 really, really large piston engines. That's the same engines that were on a B-29. That was an underpowered aircraft. With the 130 with the full tank of gas in the 130, our loiter time could be anywhere 4 to 6 hours, depending on the trip to and from the target site. So you had an extended loiter time. You could also carry the rounds that you needed to and the equipment. And also, the underside of this aircraft was heavily armored. Our gross takeoff weight was an A model, which is nowhere near what the newer aircraft was, but we were right at 125,000 pounds gross takeoff weight.
Wow.
So we were at max weight when we took off, and with fuel and personnel and weapons on board, and then the ammunition on board as well. So the 130 was, did what it does best. It hauls stuff to faraway places and does it well, and very reliable and very fixable and very safe, redundant engine systems and hydraulic systems and things of that nature.
I'm just trying to think. I mean, the system as a whole, the Spectra, the gunship as a whole. I'm trying to think why. I'm trying to think how that doctrine got in. And my thinking, the way I think about it is, it's probably there because we didn't have an A-10 Thunderbolt 2 at the time, right? Which is all about loiter, big gun, wait in a big circle for 5 hours until the baddies come out, shoot them with a gun, bugger off home. You didn't have that back then, so you needed the next best thing, right?
Exactly. You needed loiter time was what it's all about. Loiter time and the ability to, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but we could, with our good aircraft commanders, we could with the 40s, I have seen personally them hold a 6 milliradian box.
Roger.
So,
that doesn't mean anything to me, though. How do you explain that kind of to the layman?
Okay. The flares that when we would go on our overwater missions, and we would put flares out and shoot at the flares.
Wow.
I've seen my good aircraft commanders. Now this would be a hollowed out. I'm going to go with the metric 100 millimeter by 100 millimeter, what we call a 4x4 post that's hollowed out and has a saltwater activated flare in it. So when it drops the water, it goes off. I've had many of our aircraft commanders could put that flare out from 6,000 feet with a 40 millimeter round. So
I know today we're going to be asking the viewers questions, because this is all about representing the viewers, and we will go on to that. There's just some things that are just too interesting not to ask. How on earth is the aiming done? I mean, it's not done. I mean, the aircraft itself just gets roughly in position, right? And then the guns are kind of fine-tuned by some sort of gyro system, or at least on the version you were in?
The version we were in, and I'll expound, the version we were in, we knew the heights the altitudes that we were going to fly, and then the weapons mechanics, we call them the gunners, would come in and they would set the angles of the gun. We flew in a 25 to 35 degree angle of bank in what's called a left-hand pylon turn. And so you're shooting towards the center point. What we would do, we had a known point over Herbert Field where we would go to line up the gun sights, make sure the gun sights and the sensors are looking at the same position. And also the electronic warfare officer there was a signal that was broadcast from this specific place on Herbert Field, and then he would line up all his equipment there. So how this went is the pilot is, you're in a 25 to 35 degree angle of bank. We're flying, roughly 200 miles an hour, not really fast. You've got the co-pilot over there that's monitoring the throttles and monitoring the angle of bank. The flight engineer is calling out the angle of bank to the pilot. And then the pilot was looking basically not over his left shoulder, but looking left into a gun sight that shows the angle of the aircraft relative to the angle or where the sensors are looking. And what he would do is he would fly those two gun sights to go superimposed, and you would hear pilots in the sight, the calls we pilots in the sight, then you'd hear the flight engineer, 30, 31, 20, 29, calling out the angle of bank, and then the pilot would fire whichever gun he had selected, and then you would hear him. If you heard him say super means he was superimposed, which he's dead nuts on. and that's when the magic would start happening.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we were affected by winds aloft, and we could go higher or lower to get away from the winds if they were really bad. But the higher you were, the better you were, because you got more time to react to a threat at that point in time. Newer systems, as they moved into the U model, or the later versions of the H, and then they've moved in the U model, the guns, now GPS has come along and introduced, and now the guns stayed trained, just like an M1A1 cannon. You pointed at a target, and as the aircraft's flying, the guns would train to point directly at the target at all times. Much more accurate. We were accurate, but they were pinpoint.
So analog was, like with everything, analog was slowly replaced by digital. And then the pilot can just fly pretty much, the orbit he wants now, and the guns will constantly be moving left, right, up, down to get the perfect, calculating all the parameters and stuff, right?
Exactly. So then he's just worried about dealing with wind, and then it's a little bit of adding a little bit of rudder into it to correct. But it became, with the advent of digital and GPS and everything, became a little bit easier to shoot. Whereas before there was a bit of windage involved, and we had aircraft commanders. Some aircraft commanders were better than others, just like some people were better shooters than others. So it really got where they could, with a good controller on the ground, they could bring in rounds if the guys, they could bring it in on top of them if they wanted to, but they could go danger close, 30 meters. Depending on what they were shooting, and the people were dug in.
I mean, like an F-18 compared to a Phantom, obviously the digitized age just makes it a better plane, more accurate and whatnot. I love the romance of the old version, of the analog version, of the pilot having to superimpose and everything having to work together as a crew. I think that's an awesome thing to have. So when these guys, and this was used a lot, like you said, in Vietnam, what was the version called that was in Vietnam? What was his nickname? Was that a Spectra?
They call it Spectre.
That was the Spectre, right?
The Spectre it went the A's, and then actually the next follow-on version were E's, but they ended up calling it H because they upgraded the engines on them. So both the AC-130 A and H were called Spectre.
Right. Okay. So when Spectres were putting lead onto the Ho Chi Minh Trail, what were they trying to do? Were they actually targeting troops, or were they just blasting a known trail, or and if they were blasting troops and or armored vehicles to some extent, where was the information coming from?
Well, you had people, long range reconnaissance team on the ground that were providing information, but they knew where. The Ho Chi Minh Trail, as you well know, was not one body. It was many bodies. But they would go, just like going to a good place to go fishing. The fishing here is good, and they would pick select portions of the trail, and they'd fly up and down the trail for 4 or 5 hour missions. This is where the Black Crow came into, or the BC, or electronic warfare officer. He had devices that, remember, we're talking about old ignition systems with points and condensers and ignition coils, so they made a lot of electronic noise. So even if the IR sensors could see them through the triple canopy, and if the TV couldn't, the IR could, and hinge with the fact now that you got, we call the crew position for electronic warfare officer was called BC, which stood for Black Crow. And BC could pick them up. He could pick up the emissions from the ignition systems on the truck, and then they'd start hunting them out in 1 or 2 40-millimeter rounds on a truck, and it was done. And then they would go, these trucks they travel in convoys or travel in groups, and usually when you get one, you get secondaries off another, and then you just keep going until there was nothing else to shoot. Then they go fly to another part of the trail.
Oh, Joe. if it wasn't for the timing, if it wasn't for the Vietnam War, the kind of guerrilla-esque war where you've got planes kind of shooting against AK-47s, do you reckon the Spectre would never have become?
I think that's probably correct. We were fighting a guerrilla warfare in a jungle, where you very rarely, your enemy was more concerned with playing what we like to say here in the colonies, playing the long game. He just wanted to harass you and just continually bleed you down with people until you finally got tired of it and went away, and just left them alone. So I don't think we would, that ended up being subsequent to what was going in Southeast Asia at the time. I believe you're accurate. If we wouldn't have had the conflict in Southeast Asia, we wouldn't have what we have today.
Roger. Okay. Well, I've got a good feel for the history, how it was developed, why it's developed, what it could do, and why it did it. Anything else before we start turning it over to the viewers and reading out their questions?
For the time, the A model for the time was the epitome of technology. By today's technology, it's pretty antiquated, but I must brag just a minute, and then I'll get off it. They flew these airplanes from Thailand and gave them to us, all 20 of them, and gave us to them and handed them over when they stood up the unit, the Air Force Reserve unit in Duke-Field in 1975. We flew this platform for 21 years, and when you have the same pilots, the same pilots and the same crew members on there that fly with each other daily, you become dependent. It makes no difference who's in the aircraft. We've flown together so much. The crew coordination and the standardization made for a great team, no matter who was on board. And we actually we were able to prosecute targets to the fullest extent of that aircraft with the quality of crews that we had. I was very proud to be part of that unit.
Roger, and this is very much a team sport then. If you've got an average Spectre, how many guys have you got on board?
14.
Wow.
With 14, and that's with nobody having students. That would be pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer, navigator, and then when you get down in the passenger compartment or the cargo compartment, then you have 4. We call them gunners. They call them special missions airmen now. 4 gunners, 4 people in the booth. 2 of those were sensor operators, IRTV. Then the fire control officer, who actually did the majority of the talking on the radios and the coordination on the ground. Then the electronic warfare guy, and then myself, the luminaire operator. So it was a standard crew of 14 with no students.
Roger, and my thinking is that this is a team sport. This is all about how the team works together to get the results.
Exactly. When the pilot and the booth could get together, and that coordinated with a really good hot fire control officer that was really on his game, who was also a navigator as well, and then a good crew of gunners, it could just run like a well-oiled machine. And I've seen it run like a well-oiled machine.
Roger. Awesome. Okay. Right. Here we've got that John synopsis. I'm not going to read it out, but one thing we should quickly talk about before we head on is your position, which is really interesting. Illuminator operator. Can you talk us through what your personal responsibilities were?
From the 119 up, they needed a way to light the battlefield up to see what they were looking at. Remember, night vision glasses were just in there barely. You had a night vision scope, and it was like 3 feet long, and it was really, you couldn't see a whole lot with it. So you need to be able to light up the battlefield. That turned into actually a fixed spotlight with an IR lens on it that was actually manually operated, which turned into, they had the same thing, but a 20 kW light that was actually fixed and coordinated with the cameras. But you also had to have because we were susceptible to ground fire, you had to have somebody in the back to run your defensive systems, which we had a flare launching system that we could launch different kinds of flares. And these are parachute flares to eliminate the battlefield. Also, I had control of the flares, the flares that you would launch to deter. Our nemesis was SA-7s and SA-2s. So to do that, you're actually laying down on the ramp with the door up, strapped in, and up to with just about hanging out from your waist out, actually looking. It wasn't 180 degrees. It probably about 140 degrees field of view behind you, calling out threats to the aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that was your role of your eliminator operator in the A and H models.
Watch, I'm just looking at SA7. I've never seen it as SA7. This is a handheld Strela. Is that right? Like an old manpad. And did they have them in the late 60s then?
They did.
Wow.
They did. SA7s were a big threat, and of course you know about SA2. You guys.
Yeah. Wowza. I've got no idea about that. Well, my next question was going to be, at 6,000 feet, what were your threats? But it looks like you've got IR SAMs coming at you. You've got radar SAMs coming at you. What about kind of high caliber guns, kind of 23 more guns and stuff like that? Or are you out of range up there?
Oh, no. They had the 23 millimeter, whether it was fixed or whether it was on a track mounted. I could remember a million times in the tactics portion of a publication called 55-130, which was the tactics portion that all the crew members had to be responsible for. And in big bold letters, never ever duel with a gun.
Ah, how interesting.
Never duel with the gun. So because if you duel with a gun, you're going to lose. Mm-hmm. And so 23 millimeter were a big problem, because 37 millimeter was a problem. And then the fixed stuff, the 100 millimeter, that was more like artillery barrage. There wasn't a whole lot you could do about that. If you flew into 100 millimeter, you were toast. But the biggest threat was 37 and 23.
Mm-hmm. Well, we don't have 37 in game, but we do have 23. And I've always tried to teach my game, to try and teach my guys any aspect, so above or laterally, you never get within 6,000 feet. So that's 1 nautical mile or thereabouts. Because just like you said, they fire better than you fire.
Yes, they do.
You get shot down.
They are devastating. Now, I'm sure we'll get into this in a minute. Now, with the advent of the 105 millimeter gun, they could bump up to 10,000 feet and basically shoot like a sniper rifle. So then your 23s weren't a. Then you hope they'd fire, because then they would give away their position. 1 or 2 rounds of 105 and the game over.
Mm-hmm. It's artillery coming down at that point, isn't it?
Exactly.
Okay. Right, awesome. We've got a good idea of the different roles now. Right, anyway, let's plod on with the actual questions that I'm representing. So, number 1, these are questions from you. They've not been checked or analysed. I'll let you ask whatever you want. What is the most hardcore / intense weapon to fire from the side of an airplane? So, talking about the Spectre, obviously. How do you interpret that question then?
In my experience, it's the 105, because when the 105 goes off, you can feel the airframe shake, and you can feel the tail, the aft end of the aircraft. Now, whether it does it or not, it feels like it does. It feels like the tail goes right 2 or 3 degrees. When 105 goes off, you certainly know it. Now, it's dampened and has the recuperators and all that kind of stuff on it, but it's still awesome, and it is loud, like you can't believe.
Right, yeah. The natural follow-up question is, you've got a lot of energy expending here. When you fire that howitzer, aren't you pushing the plane out of line via recoil? Actually,
remember where it's developed from, which is a towed 105 millimeter howitzer. So there's shock absorbing systems called recuperators. So when it recoils, when you get the recoil where the breech is coming back from when the shell fires, and also to eject the shell, just like a tank would operate, you've got dampening systems on there that slow that down, but there's still a massive amount of force that's being applied there, but not enough I've seen, not personally, where I've seen them put 5 or 6. You can put a round down with 105 every 10 seconds. And I've seen them put six rounds a minute. So any correcting that they have to do up in the front is minimal at best.
Roger. Okay. I guess if you did the the maths, you'd find that there's so much energy in the plane as a whole. It's 60 tons or whatever that works out.
Oh, way more than with the H models, and then the H models, they're up into gross takeoff weights in like 180, 190,000 pounds. We were 130, we were 124. They're way, way, way more than we were.
Roger. Awesome. Okay. Right, let's plug along. What do you think of the Ghost Rider variant losing 40mm Bofors in favour of wing-mounted, small-diameter bombs, Griffin missiles, or Hellfire pods? I don't understand anything about that question. Is that relevant, or...?
It is, and I just read up on some stuff today.
You're going to have to tell me what a Ghost Rider is. I don't know what that is.
The Ghost Rider is the Whiskey, AC-130W. What they did is they technology, things are faster, smaller, more precise. They took the 40 millimeters off because the 40 millimeter was a weapon that was developed in the early 30s from a ship.
It was Swedish, wasn't it? Bofors?
It was. Bofors, Swedish. Very good weapon. Very, very, very heavy. And of course, I don't know how many canisters of 40 millimeter rounds I've loaded on an aircraft, but it's a two-man lift. And of course, it's all about weight. And where the 25s and the 30s, with the ability those are chain fed, like very much like the A-10 is. They're chain fed, and the gun is just far more accurate, far better performance, and it's the difference between I don't know. I guess the best way I could put it is the difference between a shotgun and a sniper rifle. Whereas you might need to put 3 or 4 40 millimeter rounds down, but those 25 or 30s. Well, the 25 is a Gatling style gun, but 30s of the Bushmaster, like on the Bradley, it's a sniper rifle that you can put that through somebody's window. And I don't know that they specifically had put it through the window, but the accuracy with the 30 millimeters it's just unthinkable how accurate that they are. Right.
Okay, then. Let's move on to the next one. Do you have any comments regarding the change from a 25mm GAU-12 equalizer? Was that the rotary cannon? Or was it not?
Yes, it is a rotary cannon, yes.
Yeah, to a 30mm GAU-23A. Okay, I'm going to have to go and look up what these weapons are because I just don't know. Let's go and have a look at a GAU.
Bigger gun, more energy. Bigger gun, more energy.
More job.
Accuracy. I think accuracy is, between the two, they're both very accurate weapon systems. Accuracy between the two, I think, is, negligible. Both are very, very accurate weapons, especially with the weapons platform that they're flying on now that's, digitally controlled and guided rather than analog.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So by the sounds of things, the GAU-12, the old 25mm Gatling gun, was probably kind of spray and pray, saturation.
Sure.
Whereas it looks like the Bushmaster, which is the chain gun, which may or may not be, interestingly, the one on the bottom of the Apache, that would be interesting,
I believe it is.
Is less saturation and more like a kind of very powerful sniper rifle, just like you said.
Indeed. It is indeed. That's why they can, with a good JTAC on the ground, they can go put rounds down danger close, and danger really, really, really close. And the troops on the ground survive.
More job. Yeah, no, absolutely. That does make complete sense, actually. It's a more modern gun for a more modern... I'm just watching that in action now. Wow.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yowza. Okay. So that, for me, it loses the romance a bit, if that's the right word, of that heffing great 25mm GAU-12 just out the side of the thing, but it's more effective. Okay, very interesting. So it's just both of those questions, the last two questions, it's simply the natural evolution of the vehicle with the technology available.
Exactly. Remember the Gatling gun that was in the AC-47 was remember you were combating large groups of North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong troops that were trying to overrun a firebase. So you needed to get a lot of lead down in a quick amount of time. And it was an area weapon rather than a more of a surgical weapon.
Okay, let's push on. Number 4. What is the procedure? How interesting. What is the procedure for bailing out of the aircraft in case of being doomed, either full crew or skeleton crew?
Well, that was part of the boldface. Everybody was responsible for boldface, and that was an item that you had to know verbatim and not miss one word on your check ride. It'll be 3 rings, followed by 3 rings of a very, very loud bell on the aircraft, followed by a very long, continuous bail, the bailout bell. By that time, you got your parachute donned, and everybody's going out the ramp and door.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so you just put the ramp out?
Yeah, the ramp. In the A and the A and the H's, the door's up, and the ramp's up, but the door's open.
Mm-hmm.
So one of my things was to get the ramp down as quickly as I could, and then everybody go out the back.
This is one of the lovely things about the Herc. It's almost like a big living room. There's so much space in there. Whereas you read about B-17s and even smaller aircraft, people trying to squeeze out of tiny little hatches between gas cylinders trying to get out. It's horrendous. But in this, it's just like, lower the ramp, off we go, chaps.
And with the cockpit crew, it could have been a bit tenuous because they actually the pilots have got to get out of their seats. Aircraft commander goes to his left, the co-pilot goes to his right, and then you got the flight engineer in the middle, and then the navigator in the back. They have to go down a small stairway or ladder, if you will, and then get down. So they would typically be the last people out.
Roger. Okay, very good. Number 5, do you have a specific experience that stays with you where a situation went fully Tango uniform, or it could have been very nasty?
Oh yes, I have one that sticks in my mind, and I probably think of it 2 or 3 times a week. Anytime I look up in the air, it was a very, very cold night. We were flying over one of the land ranges on the Eglin Reservation, and we had a runaway bleed air leak on the leading edge on the port side wing. And as you know what the leading edge is for, for de-icing and whatnot. And that bleed air going in there, 700 degrees centigrade, very, very hot. And it was runaway, and we couldn't control it. We had just gotten up. We were just about to start shooting, had a full bag of gas up there, and we were talking, the aircraft's we were handed over to a controller, and we were cleared to fire. The situation develops. The aircraft commander, Jerry Brown, I'm Colonel Brown, and I remember him well. Very, very, very calm. I used to say, "This is Colonel Brown laughing hysterically."
It's like RC.
Like RC, ice cold. Anyway, Colonel Brown gets on, and he's talking to the controller, and he's declaring an emergency. And it just happened. It has nothing to do with it, with the incapabilities. It happened to be the controller happened to be female, and she was very young and very new. And Colonel Brown's declaring an emergency, and we get Spectre 5-2, stand by. Yeah, bullshit, stand by. Anyway, tried to establish comms with the let range control know we were leaving. He ended up leaving anyway and heading on back to Duke Field and get it back on the ground. Of course, we were talking. We finally got through to the young controller, and she finally figured out what's going on. And then when we got back, we landed safely. We did the stop in the middle of the runway, all the what we call Lockheed staff cars. Those are fire trucks. And we get out, and everything's okay. The wing doesn't burn off, and we don't all die.
Okay.
And I watched my aircraft commander get on the phone, and I remember just like hearing him right now. He calls the chief. It was an E9 Chief Master Sergeant. Chief, this is Colonel Jerry Brown. And after we're done with this conversation, Chief, I can't assure you that you're going to remain a chief. And then the butt chewing started. And it went on for about 30 minutes before he drew a breath. And it was the most awesome butt chewing I'd ever heard in my life. It was great. But runaway bleed air leak, I wasn't so sure we were going to, there was nothing in the world we could do about it except wait for I had a parachute. I had it on. I was by the door. I was at my crew station, and I was waiting for the bailout signal and ready to go.
Roger. Okay, awesome story. Right, let's continue if I can find it. So that was 6. From the near dozen roles of crew for the aircraft, if it was up to a purely ground support mission in an environment of total Allied air supremacy, which would be the bare bones skeleton crew required to run the system's aircraft? Ooh, it's a tough one.
Okay. Being familiar with Air Force doctrine, there's going to be a minimum number of people assigned to their aircraft to staff it or it doesn't fly. But to answer this question, to answer the person's question, if it was an emergency, you could get that aircraft off the ground with a pilot, a flight engineer. You would have to have at least 2 gunners, and then you would have to have your sensor operators. So, and somebody has got to talk to the people on the ground, because the task saturation of everything going on the ground, especially if you're talking to multiple people, the pilot can't do all that and fly the aircraft at the same time. So if it was an absolute emergency, hypothetical situation, emergency situation on the new aircraft, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, probably seven or 8 folks to get up there and get it going. But that way, there again, you got a minimum staffing on aircraft, and the Air Force would never allow that to happen. But you could do it with 7.
Roger. I mean, it's kind of my argument why we'll never get it in DCS, because a minimum you need 7 trained operatives just for this aircraft to operate, right?
Correct. Correct.
And it's just not feasible, unfortunately. And you don't want to automate those. You don't want to automate all 6 of those and then have one of them just you as a human flying. It would be crap. So right. So although we'd all love it, there's no doubt about that.
Oh, it would be great.
It's just not feasible.
It's not feasible because all the communication that's got to go on the ground.
Yeah.
If you can't communicate with the ground, you can't shoot, because you're going to kill people if you're not coordinating with the guys on the ground. You will kill people.
Roger. Okay.
The wrong people.
Wrong people, roger. Okay. Right, okay. In many footage of this aircraft in action, there are many misses with varied range of accuracy, despite many of the weapon systems being considered area weapons. Is there any factor you think increase the chances of missing with these weapon systems, or do you think the guys in charge are as accurate as it gets? If so, why? Okay, that's interesting. Do you understand that?
Okay, I think that's an excellent question, and I'll break it down in parts. Whether winds aloft are gonna. I have been flying where we had winds aloft where the winds at our assigned altitude were just horrible, and you're getting bounced around. We weren't shooting, but we were coming back from Arizona. We had guns pulled in, and we were flying pressurized back, ferrying back. We went through a really bad thunderstorm, and I watched gun barrels come 6 feet off the ground, and they broke straps and come 6 feet off the ground. It was could have been really, really bad. Anyway, winds can really mess things up, and you can predict winds aloft, but when you get there, they can be totally different. With the advent of just technology with that Bushmaster gun, they have gone more to most of the footage that I'm seeing now. When you through live leak and the various things, you're seeing them use the 105 quite a bit more, almost primarily the 105, and now that they have the Bushmaster, they'll use the Bushmaster rather than having an area weapon, because we're much more cognizant about collateral damage, and we need to hit this building, but we can't hit that building because it's a religious site. All the basic rules of engagement. I hope does that answer what?
Absolutely. I was just thinking when you were talking about the wind. Say you're a sniper, as in literally a man with a rifle on the ground, and if there's wind, then you have to compensate for that wind. But now Correct. Imagine that the wind is also blowing the sniper around, which is what's happening. Your aeroplane's getting blown around by the wind. So even your platform, per se, is not stable in the wind. I mean, that's...
not as stable. And that round's dealing with wind all the way down.
And you've probably got different layers of wind as well. So there's a lot of...
Correct.
A lot of skill involved in that. Would you say a lot of that skill in getting that thing on target is it pure geekery maths, or is it instinct, or is it both?
I think it's both. With the wonderful digital age that we're in, and the trainable guns make it a lot easier than what it used to. But there's going to be some instinct that there's no substitute for time in the seat and trigger time, and being able to, it's one thing to have your machines, your computers and stuff give you your input. It's another thing to be able to, I say pull a trigger. It's actually push a button on the yoke, and then actually make all those systems work together. So we had we would give them the name. If we had an aircraft commander that was really, really good, we'd call him, that dude's a gunfighter, man. He is a gunfighter. And then, you had some guys that all of our guys were good, but you had some that were really, really, really good, and some that were net standard.
Roger, excuse me. Before we go on to number 8, I've just got my own question to slot in there. And that is, this aircraft, in one guise or another, has been flying since, mid-60s, late 60s, to now. That's, I make that, why can't I do it? 60, nearly 60 years. 50, no.
53 years 53. In one form or the other.
God, that's so... And that's a long... that's even getting on for kind of B-52, not quite, but nearly B-52. Why, in your mind, has it lasted so long, especially when it's gone and almost outseen the A-10 Thunderbolt?
Well, if you look at the production numbers of C-130s, they're up into, I don't know if you could do a real quick check on that. I think airframes generated by Lockheed now are over 4,000 airframes that have been generated by Lockheed.
Yeah, well, I've got, as of 2015, over 2,500, which is a lot for a big aircraft. I can't think of anything else, actually, that's,
5 years. So say 5 years, there's been well over 3,000 of those airframes developed. It's a proven system with, they fly. You can watch the Lockheed demos from last year. They're looping this airplane like it's an aerobatic airplane. We could have never done any of that. Well, you couldn't have done it with a gunship because it's too heavy. But these were J models with the, by the way, Cap, Rolls-Royce engines.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that 8-blade prop on there.
I do like that.
They're looping that airplane like it's an aerobatic. Constant upgrade of the airframe, the ability of the airframe to tote a lot of weight, loiter time, and there's just not anything that came along that could do the same thing that the AC-130 or the C-130 base platform that could do, and do it consistently, ease of maintenance, and sustainability, and being able to stay up and go get in the fight.
Roger, excellent. Okay, which pushes us on to 8. Do you see the airframe being retired on the near future, or replaced with different aircraft that fulfills the same role? Brackets, similar to the AC-47 Puff the Magic Dragon being replaced by the AC-119 Spectra.
Well, they tried that. There was some ideas with the, I can't think of the name of the company. It's the C-27. It was made out of down in South America, and it looked like a baby 130.
Okay.
And they had purchased a bunch of those, and were going to supply them to the Afghan army, and there was just a whole bunch of moving parts, and it didn't happen. Anyway, the United States Force Service and the Coast Guard have those. So they had thought about it and going with a smaller platform, maybe with just with the Bushmaster, and then of course you would have to have the optics, to be able to aim it. But it never came to fruition. They've tried many times, and since 1967, oh, by the way, the 119s flew on. We actually turned all of those over to the South Vietnamese Air Force, and they continued to fly those up until 75 when Saigon fell.
Wow.
I don't know where they are today. I don't know if the North Vietnamese flew them, continued to flew them, gave them the Russians what, I don't know, but those continued to fly. They dug a bunch of C-47s out of the boneyard and equipped those because those were at a very extreme end of Duke Field, and those had 50 cals on them rather than 20 mils, and those were being sent to Central America, and they were training crews up there too. But of course, we were, not to discuss that, and we didn't see what was going on, and then that aircraft never existed. So anyway, this is during the 80s and the Reagan administration with Iran-Contra and all that foolishness that's been over for many, many years. But yeah, they've tried many times to go and replace it, and they've found nothing better.
Awesome. Yep, excellent. Question 9. Historically, what was the minimum operating altitude while on fire missions?
Okay, very easy. AC-47 flew around 3,000 feet because that was the limits of the 762. When they got to 20 mil, we could bump up to ideal altitude was around 6,500. And then with the advent of the 105, then they could get up to 10,000 feet. And I think they can operate at 10,000 feet with the Bushmaster as well. So now they're operating 10,000 AGL.
Okay, and that's a lot safer on the higher, generally.
A lot safer, lot safer. And the thing about it is that when that aircraft's at 10,000 feet, I've been on the ground. You can hear a little bit of droning in the area, but if they can also do things it's called the synchro phase switch that has all the props are in phase and turning at the same RPM, and you virtually almost cannot hear that airplane at 10,000 feet, and at nighttime you can't see it.
And that's always been a pretty, generally speaking, it's been a pretty quiet aircraft. We have a place called Marshalls in Cambridge, the nearest kind of big city here, and that specialises in the C-130s from all over the world. Come to get maintenance, repairs, all the things that have to be done to a working airframe. We have them in and out all the time, and I don't think I've ever heard one. I don't think I've ever heard it. Not like a jet.
Very quiet. And one of the things that's really demoralizing to the people on the ground, you see the guns fire, and then it may be 4, 5, 6 seconds before the rounds impact. And now you're looking up at a dark sky, and all of a sudden now your firing position where you are is lit up and you exist no more. And it can be a very demoralizing a weapon, and where they don't have to put a lot of rounds because the guys on the ground don't want to fight it and know they can't.
Yep. No, psychological warfare in a way.
Exactly. And a MANPADS, you guys know MANPADS data, 10,000, you're very, very much less susceptible to MANPADS.
Yeah, also you've got relatively cool engines. So getting a lock on a relatively cool engine at 10,000 feet is doable, but it's a lot harder than a loud jet, for instance.
Exactly.
Interesting. Very good. Okay, let's punch on. Is there any piece of knowledge that has been handed down by the former gunship platforms and platform operators that you consider to be relevant throughout the years? More specifically, things that have stayed true since the AC-47 Spooky, that's what it was called, and the AC-119 Spectre times.
And it's going to be so simple. You're going to go, you're being flippant. Don't fly in the daytime.
Yeah.
Don't fly in the daytime. You can't see it. You can't hit it.
Were these always operated at night then?
Well, for the most part, we lost one in Desert Storm, Gulf War I. They were flying over Kuwait because the aircraft commander chose to hang around after the sun rose. Guess what happened? He got shot down.
What hit him?
It was actually, if I remember correctly, it was actually anti-aircraft artillery got him.
Wow, that is so prolific. I watched recently a clip of an AH-64 in Desert Storm. On the kind of first charge where they all charged in towards Baghdad or wherever, and the amount of ground artillery going up from 7.62 up to whatever, I've never seen anything like it. And they weren't even aiming a lot of them; they were just firing up, and a lot of stuff got hit. A lot of stuff got hit.
Yeah, absolutely, a lot of stuff got hit. I remember watching January 17th of 1991. We're watching CNN back when they were the only international game going, and watching it, and it was just like watching a paintbrush.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, the one tenet that holds true is don't fly in the daytime.
Okay, right. Well, it makes sense. Yeah, I mean, some planes have got speed, so they can fly at the daytime. Some have got stealth. This didn't have either of those, so just fly at night. Paint it black and fly at night.
Exactly.
That makes sense. Right, where are we now? The Bofors 40mm on Navy ships used to be loaded by 4-round clips. Didn't know that. Is this still the case for the onboard Bofors, and how do you get around this clip limitation?
Well, good question. Let's see, I would believe it would be the U models have still got the 40 mil. When you're looking from the ramp on the starboard side of the airplane, there's a rack there that stands about 7 feet high. And that rack is set up to take those 4-round clips. I actually have a nasty scar on my left index finger we hit an air pocket there in it. I actually cut my finger on one of the tabs that held the rack on there. So they would hold 480 rounds of 40 in that rack.
I'm looking at them now. Yeah, that's a big rack.
But to appreciate this, the ammunition came in a sealable square bucket with this waterproof lid on it, and there would be 4 clips of 4 that would be in there, and that was a 2-man lift. And you actually had to load those on the aircraft, take the clips out, load the clips onto the rack, and then get rid of give the ammo guys, give them the things back. So it was quite the ordeal of loading that up. A lot of handwork there. It could take up to an hour.
There's a lot of leg work. I mean, Gal 8 on an A10, you kind of hook it up and then you turn this machine on and it just whizzes them in. Probably half a ton of ammo or something.
Exactly.
But this, you've got to have guys doing it.
Now, this is just for free. I would look at the date stamps on the bottom of the casings of the 40 mil. I never saw anything newer than 1945.
Wowza.
1942, 43, 44, 45, and understand all the 40 mil rounds that had been shot, and they were still on Navy ships, and they were still being, with all the rounds that they expended on the gunships. And this is 1988 was the last time I flew, and still I never saw a date stamp on the bottom of the casing that was any newer than 1945.
So there were 45.
Where did we store all this
45 stuff? 45 plus years old. Don't you think? I thought gunpowder went off.
Well,
half a century.
They're staying in a sealed waterproof container, and then they're being stored in a air-conditioned, dehumidified bunker as well. So the stuff's been kept well.
So it's not, so it's not like you just took it off a ship and then chucked it in a plane. It's been stored.
Exactly. This stuff's been stored, to preserve it for as long as it possibly can.
Follow-up question: did you ever have any misfires of 40, 50 round ammunition?
Oh yeah. When you had a misfire, or you'd have it was just like firing a pistol. You'd have a failure to extract, or you'd have a double feed. A double feed on a 40 mil was a real problem, because with the absolute violence of action of that breech moving, and if it didn't extract, and then it did failure to extract, and then it tried to go back into battery with another weapon. Now we had what's called a hot gun. So we had specific routes that we had to fly back, and then of course we'd have to call, there was emergency procedures, and we would land in the middle of the runway and stop and do our evacuation procedures as if the airplane was on fire. And then of course the Lockheed staff cars would be there, and it was a big hullabaloo. But you didn't want to go fly back over, Fort Walton Beach or Crestview or Destin or any of those areas, in a 40 mil round go off and kill 20 people.
Gotcha.
Now the 20 mil that we had, the guys were pretty good. They could get that cleared, but 40 mil, man, that was just, that had to come back. And a lot of times they had to come back actually disassemble that weapon, sometimes take it out of the aircraft, disassemble it, and then clear the malfunction.
Wow. Okay. Very good.
And it could be for a myriad of things. Most of the time, it was because it was a weak round, and it was rarely because our weapons guys kept these weapons just in pristine shape, and it was usually an ammunition issue, never a maintenance.
What does a weak round mean? Something
not enough powder. When millions and millions of those rounds, it just didn't get enough powder to do what it needed to do.
Roger. Wow, was unaware of that, but okay, let's carry on. Do you think the CAS, close air support potential of the aircraft, is well assigned as it is in covering special operations, or do you think it should have a wider flexibility for CAS requirements from different guys on the ground, less high on the food chain? Now, I don't understand that. Could you explain what you understand?
I completely understand what they're trying to say. And when I was deployed to Afghanistan in 04, 05, one of the briefing was the only people that talk to 130s are going to be JTACs, and they're usually going to be embedded JTACs with specialized units. They only associate with special ops types. Why they're not associated more with maneuvering forces, I don't know. It would be a doctrine out of JSOC. In the way Joint Special Operations Command, I'm sorry, it's JSOC doctrine, but they still primarily, gunships only work with special ops guys for the most part. They only work with them.
More job. I was just reading ahead to the next question. It says, are there any ejection seats like in the B-52? There are not any in the C-130, are there?
No, sir. It's all get up and walk out the back and yell Geronimo on the way out.
Roger. Which brings me to the point that I didn't realise that the 52 had ejection seats. How interesting.
The pilots go up.
Yeah.
The other crew, depending on where they are, either go up or go down.
Oh God, can you imagine? Going up's bad enough. Can you imagine going down? Oh.
Yeah. The electronic warfare officer, and there's two stations down below, and in the back in the navigational and electronic warfare suite, 2 go up, 2 go down.
Wow. Okay. Maybe one day I'll get a 52 operator on. Okay, let's push on. Did you ever get a chance in combat or in training to, quote, make it rain and open up with everything for area saturation?
Oh God, yeah. Once a year, we would have a family night where the families could go out to one of the go to the ranges, and of course we'd have a big barbecue, and there'd be buses, and then everybody would meet down there, and they'd have a couple. They would demonstrate the capabilities to the families and the pinpoint capabilities, and then the ultimate finale was going to be the second ship would open up with all 3 weapon systems, and it will make goosebumps come to your skin, and thank the good Lord above that you're not on the receiving end of it.
Roger. Yeah.
And Cap, the really cool thing is you can hear we always hear the brr of the 30. Well, it was the same thing with the 20. You could hear the brr of the 20, and then you hear the gun stop firing, and then 5 or 6 seconds later, you've still got action on the ground.
Yeah.
It's cool. It's too cool.
That would be cool. I'd love to see that. Okay, that's interesting. And just in terms of use of make it rain type situation, is that for kind of like grid square elimination, or is it worded differently? We had an MLRS operator at some point, and he would fire to take an entire grid square out. Maybe it's a bit different.
It would do. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, sir. Yeah. You would never do that in a combat situation where you got troops on the ground. They would. Now, I've seen 5-6 second burst, which is a lot of rounds out of a 20. But you've also got limitations on how long you can fire that 20 because of the overheating. And then the 40, of course, you can fire the 40 as fast as the gunners can keep feeding rounds in there. And I've seen 5-6 a dozen 40 rounds go, off at one time. You're shooting subsequent rounds. It'll just keep firing until you run out of ammunition. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you're limited to your barrel restrictions there, and you don't want to heat up a barrel to the point where you get a round when it goes into battery, it'll overheat and fire.
Gotcha.
That's never a good thing.
Okay. Right. Okay.
Lastly, I've seen the aircraft commander and the gunners would get in a competition to see who could keep up with who, and of course the pilot would stay within its restrictions because you don't want to melt the gun barrels. Mm-hmm. But you can put somebody ankle deep in 20 mil rounds pretty quick, and of course they're scooping them with the snow shovel into cans.
Yeah.
And they have a trough that folds up from the floor and attaches, so they're going down in this trough, so they're actually shoveling rounds and trying to keep up with the pilot. And a good set of gunners could do it. A good set of gunners could.
I was looking at some pictures and noticed that the brass, used canisters are still in the plane. Why aren't they just shoved out of a chute outwards?
You would have to run it through the airframe and down and out in a way, and they don't want to put rounds out where you're possibly going to hit a prop, beat the side of the airframe out.
Right.
As it goes on, because stuff will bounce down the side of an airframe. Mm-hmm. It would just bringing it home was just easier way to do it.
Okay, I suppose it's not heavy. It's not particularly heavy once it's suspended. It's very good. Okay, let's push on. By 25mm Bushmaster cannon, you must mean the GAU 12 equalizer. So I think it's just a typo you made at the top in the synopsis. So, okay. How accurate have you seen it be on action to merit the sniper rifle compliment in measure of X amount of rounds in a house? I'm not quite sure what that means. Size target. For reference, please. How do you make of that question?
I have to be perfectly honest on this. We did not have the 25. I can speak to the 20.
Right. Okay.
Depending on the aircraft commander, depending on the winds aloft, I could see 20 mil because you're watching this shoot. And when I say watching it, you can be in the booth and watch it too, because those guys have got the with the TV and the IR guy. Mm-hmm. I've watched the 20 mil, and those keeps inside 30 in a circle, maybe 30 meters, maybe less.
Roger, yeah.
Yeah, and there again, that's going to depend on the wind and depend on the wind, depending on the pilot.
Roger. So that would be like a big burst, like a 6-second burst.
Yes. They would run 3 to 5 seconds on a burst because you're putting 3,000 rounds a minute out, so that's a lot of rounds.
Roger. Is that the same? Do you know if that's the same thing as the Vulcan cannon, or is it a different cannon?
That's the 20. That's the Vulcan.
That's the Vulcan, right? Yeah. I mean, the Vulcan on an airplane, as in, on a fighter jet, was never renowned as an accurate weapon. I know that it was always a bit of a scatter weapon. So
yes,
yeah, interesting.
But with there again, pylon turns, the advent of having some really good electronics, you could make at 6,000 feet, you can make a not so great weapon into a great weapon.
Also, the other thing is my understanding of why it wasn't very accurate. I think you had a lot of vibration and movement in a fighter because you didn't have particularly good mounts. Whereas a thumping great AC-130, you could dampen those mounts, you could make stronger mounts, whatever.
Exactly. Very, very stable platform.
I'm sure you could accurize that. Okay, very good. How many rounds does the 105 Howitzer carry?
In the A's didn't have the 105s, the H's did. 96 in the H's, and then when they went to the U's, they doubled that, so it was over 200. Now, with the W, they put the 105 in the W. I would assume that in the W, it says twice. I've looked it up, and it says twice the capacity before, so it's over 200.
Roger. Okay. And was that one every 10 seconds, or was that one every 6 seconds? I forgot.
Every 10 with a good crew. Every 10.
Yeah. Roger. Okay.
Because they actually have to. It's just like a 105 howitzer on the ground. They have to actually open the breech, get the round out, and discard the round, and then put a new round in. So a good trained crew every 10 seconds. And just to give somebody the idea, that round typically weighs 42 pounds.
Yikes! I could barely lift that. So that is So that gun is just too big to automate the loading. You need a guy.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Fine. Regards to the A version, I suppose, that you were in, how long can it stay airborne?
We could stay airborne, depending on the trip to and trip back. We could stay up 6 hours.
Roger.
Remember, you don't have to burn fast holes in the sky when you don't want to burn fast holes in the sky when you get where you're going. The newer versions, of course, they got more fuel capacity and everything. Those guys can loiter almost twice that.
Roger. Wowza. Yeah, that is pretty amazing. I'll give it that. There's not much else in the world in terms of attacking aircraft that can do something like that. If anything,
especially now with the W models and all the stuff that it's a flying weapons artillery platform, not just guns, but with the AGMs that they carry on them now.
Yeah, right, absolutely. Okay, right. So we've talked about your kind of worst, if you like, memories. What is the best mission or best memory you've flown? Most memorable or best outcomes?
Best outcome was. We were down in Puerto Rico shooting on Vieques Island, and we had a good crew. Everybody I flew with, that outstanding crew, outstanding aircraft commander, and it was part of a combined armed exercise. We were on target, on time, and put on a light show that was absolutely gorgeous. And right as we were done and ready to leave station, the sun was coming up, and it was the most beautiful azure blue lagoon where we were shooting. It was something that you couldn't have painted a prettier picture. And as soon as the sun was coming, of course, we'd get out because we don't, try not to fly in the daytime. But that was one of the most memorable occasions.
Roger. That sounds very nice. Never had this one before, but your favorite crew member nickname that you've flown with? Interesting.
Most of our pilots came from the airlift community. We had, call signs weren't really big in the 60s and 70s among your airlift guy, but we had one of our guys I can't remember Jack's last name, but he ended up being one of our squadron commanders. But Jack's call sign was Gunfighter, and he was a short, stubby, kind of chunky guy that you would never. And this guy he was an artist with a 20 millimeter. This guy could use rudder and yoke, and I've actually seen him do a Zorro Z.
It's funny.
Just like Zorro did with his rapier. I've seen him do a Zorro Z on the ground with Tracer, and it was Jack. I wish I could remember what his name was. He was actually a standards and evaluation pilot with FAA as well. But Jack's call sign was Gunfighter, and he damn sure was one.
Roger. Where are we? This is an interesting one. We may have to modify this slightly. Are the weapon systems in the Spectra more effective against vehicles or soft targets? Now, vehicles can be soft targets, so I'm assuming that would mean armored vehicles or soft targets. Is that how you read that?
I think it's equally as with the 105, unless something's dug in underground, it will take out structures. Of course, if they're hardened structures with 20-foot thick, like these submarine pins at St. Nazaire back in World War II. But it's equally as devastating with vehicles and structures, especially now with these GPS guided AGMs that they're hanging on them and shooting.
Okay. Right. What's next? What would be the standard armament on most such AC-130s, and which are belt fed and which require manual feeding? Does that impact the accuracy of the weapon? Well, everything's auto. No, hang on. So the chain gun is going. The rotary cannon is going to be belt fed, isn't it?
Correct.
Suck that in. The Bofors Did you say the Bofors was loaded every four rounds?
It's clip fed, and you can put 8 rounds in the what we would know as the magazine well on a gun, regular firearm or a rifle. But you can put 2 clips in there, and then they just keep feeding them in as space becomes available.
Right, that makes sense.
So it'll hold. If you put if you didn't reload it, it could fire 8 rounds.
Roger. Now the Bushmaster, I don't know if you know because this wasn't your gun, but to me it looked like you were feeding in kind of 6 to 8 round clippy things, a bit like a Bren gun or something. There's that.
They're very, very similar, and it can keep going until you run out of ammunition. And of course, the 105 is it's manually fed, just like a 105 round would be in a Howitzer, or it's the same gun they used in a Howitzer and then in tanks back in the day.
Roger. And it says, does this impact the accuracy of weapons? I don't see why that's relevant in any way.
No, not at all.
No,
not at all. The accuracy's where the barrel's pointed at the time that the trigger's pulled.
Roger. Okay. In a popular mechanics article video, a crew of a modern AC-130 is interviewed, and one of the weapons officers calls the 25mm Gauss equalizer an area weapon for infantry, while he compliments the 40mm Bofors as their sniper rifle. While you called the equalizer a sniper rifle, what is your thought on this, and how would you rate the accuracy of both weapon systems compared to each other? So we're comparing the Bofors 40 and the 25mm rotary cannon.
The rotary cannon, of course, it operated much like the 20, was a little more accurate, and it's designed to be an area weapon. We had, just a real quick sidebar, we had pilots that were quick enough on the trigger where they could fire 1 round out of a 20. It took very, very, very good coordination, but that didn't happen very often. That would be when they were getting in, contests for who's going to buy the beer when we got back with the gunners. Anyway, so the 25's coming out in a Gatling, so you got multiple rounds coming out, whereas with the 40s, back in the day, the 40s, that's a sniper rifle, single round. You could shoot just 1 round on it because of the way very easily. It's just you have multiple rounds coming out versus single round coming out. There again, as I'd referenced before, I've seen pilots put out saltwater flares the size of a 100mm by 100mm board at 6,000 feet. I've seen them put them out subsequent times.
Okay.
I have a question, Cap.
Send.
Did you guys fly with escorts? Did you have cap?
Typically, no. In Vietnam, they did. They would coordinate with the F4s, but typically, that's if they had, to do. The F4 would back in the day would do seed type stuff. So they go in there if they had a missile threat, they'd go in there and do some wild weasel work. But typically, the gunships were operating alone by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So you wouldn't fly if there was air threats?
Well, there was always air threats, but when the air threats come up, you go somewhere else.
Okay, got it.
And this links straight into the next question about information and situational awareness. Were the A's ever linked to AWACS?
No. Well, we could talk to AWACS, but we weren't. We didn't have the capability to be data linked. Now, in the subsequent versions with the U models, they could talk, talk in I guess, covertly through data link and things of that nature with AWACS. But you would get tasking, go here, go there. But generally, the mission sets with the 130s are, you're going here, you're working with, you're talking to these JTACs that are going to be near these coordinates, and they're going to have these targets for you. And if you got deviated by AWACS or, with SATCOMs and everything, you could talk to almost anybody. It's because there was an emergency situation, troops were in contact, and things had gone to the old crapper, and they needed you, and they needed you right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. I can recall when they tested the flares on a helo I rode, on how hot it was despite there being a hull in between me and the flare. Was that the same when you were firing flares? Could you feel the heat in any way?
Absolutely. I mean, it would come out in almost, it would feel like the sun on your face for about 2 seconds.
Wow.
As it's falling away. That's how bright and hot that it was coming out.
Never thought about that. I never even thought
Absolutely.
about. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Things-
You never wanted to catch around in those flare dispensers.
Oh,
'cause
God,
that could
can you
be a bad
imagine?
day. That could be a really bad day.
It's just one of the many things you don't think about as a virtual pilot. You know, heat isn't a thing, vibration isn't a thing. You know, things like that you will never get to experience.
Not only could you
smells.
you could feel them, you could smell them too.
Wow, how about that? Yeah. Yeah. Wow, amazing.
In the bright, you would also to be able to maintain your night vision when you fired the flares. You had to remember to shut your eyes, because if not, you'd just totally lose your night vision.
Roger. I guess once you'd fired, it was just cordite inside the smell. Is that right, or whatever? You know,
it would be cordite-ish. You know, that real pungent smell of cordite. And of course, there's other chemicals and stuff in there, but you could definitely smell them.
Roger. Interesting. Okay. 25. Also, how much of the kickback could you feel from the guns being fired from inside the AC-130? It seems like the kickback from a 105 would probably rattle the plane quite a bit, but it seems like the airframe handles it well. We've sort of talked about this, but anything else you want to translate?
The 20s, the 40s, and we actually had 762s for a while, so they just took them out because you got to fly too low for 762s. Other than the sheer noise and the violence of the 40s, and then the sheer actually great sounds of freedom from the 20. Imagine being right next to the 20 when you get the burr.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome. But the only thing where you feel like you got a sense where it's kicking the tail around was the 105, and that not a whole bunch. I mean, if you're standing there with it and you've done it long enough, you could feel it, but it wasn't to the point like the nose goes askew to the left 5 or 6 degrees at all. So it wasn't to the point where, oh crap, we got to get back on, like you'd fired a pistol in the recoil and now you have to regain your target fixation and fire again. And remember, you're trying to push, it's a 105 round trying to push 180,000 pounds sideways.
You need a lot of them firing at once to do it. Okay, as an IO, don't know what an IO is, a illumination operator, were you a prior crew chief or a load master?
Came out of the crew chief. I came out of the crew chief field. Matter of fact, the tech school that I had to go to, you had to be a qualified crew chief to get in the program.
Why is that? I don't understand what that's all about.
Well, you also were if you had things you got somewhere, you'd also need to be able to make your repairs and whatnot, refuel the aircraft, and God forbid, change a tire and supervise the maintenance of it. So who better to do that than your maintenance personnel?
Okay. So you were a crew chief prior to this then?
Correct. Right. Correct. Now, when they moved on into the U model, that the IO position went away and it became more of a loadmaster's position. It was taught aircraft defensive system.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, I've got 3 more that I've added in that you can't see.
Sure.
This one we ask everyone. This is fantasy. This is, top trumps, we'd call it in England. I don't know what you call it. But realism aside, if you ever got to fly a plane, as in be the pilot, what would you love to have flown?
Hands down, C-130. Hands down.
Yeah, that's another one that's gone for his plane. You're going to have to justify that because C-130 doesn't rate up to a, F-15 in my humble opinion. So talk us through it. Okay,
C-130, but I mean, if you said right now you want to go fly something right now, I want to fly a Bell UH-1 U model that the Marine Corps flies. I believe they call it the Viper. That's got the twin engines and a lot of power. If I could fly something, and project myself right now, it would probably be that aircraft.
What was it, Bell?
The Bell UH-1 November or Zulu, I think they're up to now.
God knows.
I think it's either called the Viper or the Venom.
Oh,
it's Marine Corps assets. They're the only one flying them.
Wow, yeah, okay. So this is a modified Huey, isn't it? A modern Huey,
yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. Interesting answers. No flamey afterburners here. Okay, very good. You know what you like.
I never was in the Yank and Bank community. I grew up in Pensacola, which is where naval aviation was born, and then your primary helicopter training is at Whiting Field. And I remember a bumper sticker that I saw many years ago back in the late 70s, and that bumper sticker said, "No helos, no heroes."
Roger. Okay.
So, and my dad was also in his last half of his career as an aircraft mechanic. He was helicopter transmissions, rotor heads, combining gearboxes, and things of that nature. So helicopters were very near and dear to my heart.
Roger. Okay. A question that I just put down when we were talking. I mean, for me, I don't know if pinnacle is the right word, but the original, if you like, most exciting bit of the Spectre was its raining lead in Vietnam, during the inception. Do you know, were Spectres lost in Vietnam? Like yes. B-52s were shot down, were Spectres shot down?
3 of them. They were SA, and I actually met and talked with and flew with one of the guys that actually got out. They were 30. One of them was confirmed SA2, and one guy got out. He actually, by luck, got blown out of it. And then the other was ground fire. I think they lost a total of 3. Now, they had aircraft get hit and then fly home and get home safely, but they lost 3. One was in Laos, and one was, and I think the other, I think they were all up in the Laos area because it was all Ho Chi Minh Trail type places where they were. So, yeah, I believe it was a total of 3 SA2s and then probably 37 millimeter.
Roger. Wow. Okay. I mean, 3 is not too bad.
No, 3 out of all the missions, and they were flying around the clock from 68 up until 73. I had the pleasure of having the aircraft commander, Walter P. Holloway. He was in the left seat on the Maya Gez incident where the Cambodian gunboat tried to take an American ship, and the Marines tried to go liberate it, and stuff went sideways, and he was actually the one that turned that Cambodian gunboat into splinters.
Wowza.
With the 105.
Okay, sounds interesting. Okay, on to our final official question. Why hasn't there been a carrier variant of the C-130? The Hercules carrier ops test seemed successful enough, so when they were landing, I guess, C-130s on carriers enough. You'd think a more portable version of that plane would be a nice addition, as it would allow the C-130 to be deeper and longer into enemy territory. So this is a fair comment. Why can't it operate from a carrier? Because then you could take it the other side of the world much easier.
And I can answer that. That was a Navy 130 that you see. That was, I think, a B model. And that was done back in the early 60s.
Yes.
You get it on board. Now it's got to sit outside. Okay, the ship that you would have to build to accommodate a 130, and then I'm not knowing the gross takeoff weights, but you could potentially land one on a carrier with a lot of wind, but I don't think at gross takeoff weight with all of guns and ammo and everything on board, I don't think you could take one off. Plus, with the wingspan of a 130, can you imagine the width of the flight deck?
All sorts of problems you've got there.
Oh yeah, logistically, it would be cool. Oh God, yeah, wouldn't be cool. But remember, everything from the H's up, it's all been air refuel capable, so they can get wherever they need to go. And plus, the new versions, they can pull the guns in and go pressurized, so you can go up to 30,000 feet and go at 350 knots indicated, and then go fly and get somewhere.
Roger.
And that's also not a weapon system that sits right next to the forward edge of the battle area. You don't want that so close where the enemy can come overrun and take that.
Yep.
That's going to be setting back, couple hours of flying time, so as you say, the baddies can't run in there and grab one.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't have one, but when we use our A-10s, you can't use them anywhere near the front line because they are glass. I know they're known for being tough, but they are tactically glass aircraft. They can't run, they can't hide.
That's right.
You can't use one anywhere near a front line, and every time the people that try will get shot down. This is just natural selection of aircraft, and you're just a bigger, even easier target to an AMRAAM up in a C-130. So, like you said, you've got to be hours flying time away from that front line with air supremacy if you're going to think of using it.
Exactly, and that's the key, is air supremacy.
Interesting. One more question come in. How long from now do you think the Hercules, it doesn't say AC-130, but it says Hercules, will serve?
I think, well, we got 3,000 airframes out there. All that's flying on the Air Force has started to retire. All the active duty H models are in the boneyard. Okay, so what's flying now is the subsequents that follow on that. You got probably 1,000 J models out there being flown by private entities and nations from all over the world. I can't see anywhere in the distant future. Let's just say this: Lockheed's not tearing down the C-130 plant up in Marietta, Georgia, anytime soon.
Just one of those planes that just worked really well.
It just never gone away. And it's outlasted the first 130s. Flew in 50. We actually had the first 130 that the Air Force ever purchased, which is tail number 53129. And when we had it, it had over 30,000 hours worth of flight time on it. But yeah, so we're flying. 130s have been flying since '54 till now, and not even the Soviets are, with the AN-12. I don't even think they haven't made AN-12s in years, but 130s have lived almost in perpetuity near now.
Okay, John, that was thoroughly. I don't know if you enjoyed that. I found that thoroughly enjoyable. I've learned so much. I came into this knowing that there was a Herc with guns, and it was called a Spectre, and that was it. Now I know not everything, but a lot about this, and it's clear. I really like it when I interview someone that really knows their subject, like you. I don't think I can catch you out anywhere with anything, because you just know your subject, and it's not because you've sat and revised. It's because you just love your subject, and that's the other thing, that you clearly are very fond, very keen of this. Not just a piece of metal, but the whole thing that it represents, and the people and the teams and stuff like that, and I'm proud. And that's really, really good. Really good. Makes a perfect interview, should we say? And you're a good interviewer anyway. I don't have to keep thumping you. You can talk. You can talk well. Right. So I really enjoyed that. Thank you very much. I look forward to doing some leather crafting. So it's gone from firing guns and flares to leather crafting, and that's fine. I really enjoyed it. The guys really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy seeing the video. John, I will catch up with you in the future. But for now, all the best.
All the best, sir. Thank you. RC, did you have to go to the restroom? Did you have to go to the restroom?
No.
Wow. Even with your old man bladder. You did a 5-mile walk, apparently. All right, well, we'll see about that.
Permit me one indulgence. RC, how wonderful for you.
Oh, there it is. That's a great way to win.
It was wonderful.